Have you ever thought you knew someone completely, only to discover a side of them you never knew existed? I thought I knew everything about my mother. But after she passed away, I found out that nothing was what I thought it was. It was a Tuesday morning, and my whole world came crashing down. My mother, Donna Clark, had died suddenly of a heart attack. She was only 58. The news hit me so hard, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I called her every morning, like clockwork, but today was different. No answer. It wasn't like her. I rushed over to her house, a small, cozy bungalow where she had lived alone since I left for college. When I walked in, I found her lying peacefully in her bed. At first, I thought she was just sleeping, but the paramedics confirmed the worst. It was a heart attack. She had been healthy, or so I thought. No warning signs. Just gone. And just like that, I was an orphan. My father had left when I was 2, and I hadn't heard from him in years. So, all I had was my mom, and now, she was gone too. The funeral was small, just a few close friends, co-workers from the law firm where she'd worked for 25 years, and my girlfriend, Melanie. Everyone spoke highly of her, calling her kind and quiet, someone who kept to herself but was always pleasant. There wasn't much to say because, on the outside, my mom had lived such a simple, uneventful life. But I thought I knew everything about her. She worked at the same job for decades, lived in the same house, and spent her nights reading. She was steady and reliable, nothing extraordinary, just normal. And I thought that was enough. But everything changed when I went to meet her lawyer a week after the funeral. Robert Park had been handling her legal matters for years, and I assumed he'd have some paperwork for me to go through. What I didn't expect was the strange condition attached to her inheritance. Robert handed me a thick, sealed envelope, with my name written on it in my mom's neat handwriting. Inside, there was a photograph and an old key. He explained, before you can access your inheritance, you need to find the man in this photograph and deliver this key to him. Only then will you be able to claim the full inheritance. I was stunned. Why had she done this? Why had my mom left me this bizarre task? I didn't know the man in the photo. I didn't even know where to start. Robert explained that she had set this up 5 years ago and updated it annually. The instructions were clear: deliver the key, and then the full inheritance would be mine. At first, it didn't make sense. My mom had always been practical. She never wanted anything complicated. So why would she do something like this? But Robert assured me that the inheritance would remain in trust if I didn't complete the task. The house and her savings, which amounted to around $75,000, would be mine right away. But there was a secondary account and some other assets that I could only access after fulfilling her request. I couldn't believe it. My mom, the woman who lived a quiet, simple life, had set up some kind of treasure hunt after her death. I took the envelope home, still in shock, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph of my mom, probably in her early 30s, standing in front of an antique shop. She was smiling, her arm around a man I didn't recognize. The man looked about the same age as my mom, tall and thin with dark hair and glasses. They looked comfortable together, like they had known each other for years. Behind them, I could make out part of a sign in the shop window. It was hard to read, but the letters STRICORNCLOC were visible. I had no idea what it meant. Who was this man? And why was I supposed to find him? I showed the photograph to Melanie. She immediately started researching. After a few minutes, she looked up and said, "Capricorn Clock Repair. There's a shop by that name in Seattle. It's been there for over 40 years. Seattle. That was only 2 hours away from where I lived. But I had never heard my mom mention this place. Why had she kept it a secret? I tried calling the shop. The phone rang and rang, but no one picked up. I left a message. My name is Henry Clark. I'm looking for Stephen Foster. Please call me back. It's about Donna Clark. But no one returned my call. After 3 days of waiting, I couldn't stand it anymore. I decided to drive to Seattle. I had the photograph, the key, and a lot of questions, but no answers. When I arrived in Seattle, I found the shop in an older part of town, where the buildings hadn't been renovated and gentrified. Capricorn Clock Repair was tucked between a used bookstore and a record shop. The window was full of old clocks, from cuckoo clocks to grandfathers. It looked like a place out of another time. The door was locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. After a long pause, I heard footsteps inside. The door cracked open, and I saw the man from the photograph. He was in his late 50s now, with gray hair and glasses. He looked startled when he saw me. Donna Clark, he said softly. What about her? She passed away 2 weeks ago, I replied. His face went pale. He opened the door wider and invited me in. The inside of the shop was overwhelming. Clocks were everywhere, ticking and talking in a constant rhythm. The smell of wood and oil filled the air. It was like stepping into another world. Come in, he said. I should have checked on her, but she was so insistent on keeping things separate. I don't understand, I said. How did you know my mom? He looked at me with a pained expression. She never told you about me? I pulled out the photograph and handed it to him. He took it, and his hands shook as he looked at it. This was taken 26 years ago, he said quietly. We were close, very close. But who was this man? Why did my mother keep him a secret? And what was I about to uncover about her that would change everything I thought I knew? I sat down in the small back room of the clock shop, my mind racing. The man in the photograph, Stephen Foster, seemed to know my mother, but I couldn't understand why she'd never mentioned him. Why would she keep such a significant part of her life hidden from me? Was there something more to her life than I'd ever known? Stephen sat down across from me, his face pale. He stared at the photograph of my mother, the woman I thought I knew so well, but now felt like a stranger. His eyes were filled with sorrow, and his voice trembled as he spoke. I should have visited her, he said softly, more to himself than to me. I should have checked on her, but she was always so insistent about keeping things separate. She wanted to keep us apart. I leaned forward. What do you mean by that? Why did she want to keep us apart? Stephen's eyes met mine, and for a moment, it felt like he was trying to decide how much to say. Finally, he spoke. Your mother was complicated. She was one of the most talented writers I've ever known. But she didn't want anyone to know. She wanted to live a quiet life, away from the world. She was afraid of being seen. I was stunned. My mother, the quiet, private woman who spent her evenings reading novels and asking about my life, was a writer? A novelist? It didn't make sense. She had always been so modest about everything. She never mentioned writing, let alone publishing books. I had to know more. How do you know this? Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Stephen looked down at the photo again. We met in college. Both of us were English majors, both with dreams of being writers. But after graduation, life got in the way. I opened this shop to make a living, and Donna got a job as an executive assistant. But she never stopped writing. I felt like I was in a fog, trying to piece together the fragments of my mother's secret life. So, she was a writer all along? Yes, Stephen replied, his voice filled with sadness. She published her first book in 1999, when you were 5. But she used a pseudonym, M. Hicks. She insisted on complete anonymity, no interviews, no photos, no book tours. She didn't want anyone to know who she was. She didn't want the attention, the fame. She was afraid. I was shocked. My mother, the woman who worked in a law office for 25 years, who had spent her nights reading and asking me about my day, had been living this entire double life as a successful novelist. How had I never known? I took a deep breath, trying to process everything Stephen was saying. So, all these books, they were hers. Yes, Stephen said, nodding. All 12 of them. Bestsellers. Critically acclaimed. But Donna never wanted to take credit for them. She wanted to remain in the shadows, and that's exactly what she did. I looked at the photograph again. My mother was smiling in it, standing next to Stephen, in front of the antique shop. It felt like a different woman in the photo, a woman I didn't recognize. It was hard to imagine that this was the same woman who had cooked my meals, attended my graduation, and asked about my day at work. But why didn't she tell me? I asked, feeling the weight of the years I'd spent not knowing the truth. Stephen sighed, his voice heavy with regret. She wanted to. She almost told you many times. But she was afraid. She was afraid of what you'd think of her. Afraid you'd feel betrayed. Afraid of being exposed. I didn't know what to say. How could my mother have hidden something so big from me? Was it betrayal, or was it fear? Could I ever understand why she'd kept this part of her life hidden from me? Did she leave me something? I asked. What's in the key and the envelope? Why am I here? Stephen stood up and walked over to a large grandfather clock in the corner of the shop. It was easily 8 feet tall, made of dark wood with intricate carvings. He took the key I had brought with me and inserted it into a small lock at the base of the clock. I watched, heart pounding, as the lock turned, and a hidden panel in the clock swung open. Inside was a leather portfolio, thick with papers. Stephen pulled it out carefully and handed it to me. Your mother was M. Hicks, he said softly. And this is her legacy. I took the portfolio, my hands shaking. The weight of it felt heavy in my lap, like I was holding a secret that was meant to change everything I knew about my mother. I opened it slowly, my mind racing. Inside were printed pages, manuscripts, contracts, and letters. And on top of everything was a sealed envelope with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. M. Hicks, I whispered. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. I had heard it before, but I never made the connection. Your mother's work was extraordinary, Stephen continued. She never wanted anyone to know who she was, but she created a world with her words. And now, it's all yours. I pulled the envelope from the portfolio and opened it with trembling hands. Inside, there were several pages written in my mother's neat handwriting. My dearest Henry, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And Stephen has given you the key to the truth I was too afraid to tell you while I was alive. I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry that you had to learn about this part of my life after I was gone. That I didn't have the courage to share it with you when I could have seen your face, answered your questions, explained myself properly. But I was always too afraid. Afraid of judgment. Afraid that you'd think I'd lied to you your whole life. Afraid that my secret identity would be exposed, and I'd have to face the fame and attention I've spent almost 30 years avoiding. I paused, unable to continue for a moment. The letter was filled with apologies, with explanations I had never expected. It felt like my mother was speaking directly to me, from beyond the grave, trying to explain everything she had kept hidden. But Henry, I need you to know something. Being your mother was the only thing I was never afraid of. The one thing I could always be honest about. Everything else I hid. And I am sorry for that. But I need you to understand that my writing was a love letter to you. Every story I wrote was about the strength of mothers, the love for their children, and the fear of being truly seen. Please forgive me for not sharing this with you sooner. I was crying now. The weight of her words, the truth about her life, and the secret she had carried for so long overwhelmed me. She had been afraid. Afraid of the very thing I had never understood, the fear of being known. But I wasn't ready for what she said next. I want you to publish my final manuscript, Henry. It's the most honest thing I've ever written. It's called The Woman Who Hid, and it's about a mother who lives a secret life and the son who discovers the truth after she's gone. Please, let the world know who I really was. Let them see me, even if it's too late. I looked up at Stephen, my mind spinning. What do I do now? He nodded, as if he had been waiting for me to ask. It's time to let your mother's story be told. But how would I do this? Could I really share my mother's secret life with the world? Could I honor her wish and let the world know who she really was? The letter from my mother was still in my hands, and the weight of it felt like a burden, but also like a gift. The words on the page were her final act of honesty, a final request that I, her son, share with the world the woman she had kept hidden for so many years. I stared at the letter for a long time, my mind racing. My mother, Donna Clark, had been a mystery to me in so many ways, and yet, I had never questioned who she was. She was my mom, the woman who had raised me, who had made my lunch every day, who had been there for every school event, every graduation, every milestone in my life. I had never thought there was more to her, never imagined she had lived a life so different from the one I knew. But now, with this letter in my hands, everything had changed. She had been more than just a quiet woman working as an executive assistant. She had been a writer, a successful novelist, and yet, she had kept that part of herself a secret from me. And now, she was gone, leaving behind a legacy that was waiting to be revealed. I turned to Stephen, who had been watching me quietly. His face was filled with empathy, but also a quiet understanding. He had known my mother in ways I never had. He had been her confidant, her friend, the one person who had shared in her secret life. He had been the one to help her navigate the world of writing, publishing, and royalty statements, all while she kept her true identity hidden. How do I even begin? I asked, my voice low. How do I tell the world that my mother was M. Hicks? That she wrote all those books while working a 9-to-5 job and raising me? Stephen sat down beside me, his hands resting on his knees. You start by telling the truth, Henry. Your mother wanted her story told. She trusted you to share it. And she trusted you to be brave enough to step into the light, just like she never could. His words were both comforting and terrifying. How could I, the son of Donna Clark, the woman who had lived so quietly, suddenly step into the world of publishing and fame? My mother had kept this life hidden for so long. Could I really bring it all to light? I took a deep breath and looked down at the portfolio Stephen had handed me. Inside were pages upon pages of my mother's work, manuscripts, contracts, letters from publishers, and even royalty statements. It was a treasure trove of her life, a life she had kept hidden from the world. I knew that I had to do something with this. I couldn't just let it sit in a box, collecting dust. My mother had trusted me with her secret, and now it was time to share it. But the question was, how? I decided to start by reading everything. I needed to understand my mother's voice, her story, her true self. I needed to understand why she had been so afraid, so determined to keep her identity hidden. So, over the next few weeks, I dove into the manuscripts, reading each one carefully, savoring the words she had written, the stories she had told. The first novel, The Distance Between Stars, was a poignant tale of a mother and son trying to reconnect after years of silence. The second, Quiet Revolutions, explored the inner lives of women struggling with their own identities, trying to balance their personal desires with the expectations of the world around them. Each book seemed to reveal a little more about my mother, about the woman who had raised me, but also about the woman she had kept hidden from everyone, including me. As I read through the novels, I began to understand her fears. My mother had been afraid of being seen, of being known. She had been afraid of the spotlight, of the world knowing who she was and what she had accomplished. She had hidden behind a pseudonym because she believed that if anyone knew the truth, it would all fall apart. She was terrified of the judgment, the attention, the expectations that would come with fame. But as I read her words, I realized that she had been afraid of something more. She had been afraid of failing. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid that if she put herself out there, people would see her as a fraud, someone who wasn't worthy of success. It was heartbreaking to realize that my mother had spent her entire life hiding from the very thing she was most talented at. She had built a wall around herself, separating her two lives, one as a quiet, unassuming woman who worked as an executive assistant, and the other as a brilliant writer whose books had touched the lives of so many. I needed to share this with the world. I needed to tell her story. But I also knew that doing so would be a huge responsibility. My mother had never wanted to be in the spotlight. She had kept her identity a secret for so long that revealing it now felt like an invasion of her privacy. Yet, as I read her final manuscript, The Woman Who Hid, I understood that this was her legacy. This was her final request, to be seen, to be heard, to be known for who she truly was. The novel was a reflection of everything my mother had hidden, her fear of being exposed, her love for me, and the complicated relationship between a mother and her child. It was raw and honest in a way that none of her previous works had been. It was her truth, her story, the one she had kept locked away for so long. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I reached out to Melanie, who had been with me every step of the way through this journey. She had supported me, listened to me, and understood my grief better than anyone else. She had known my mother, though not as well as I had, and she had been just as shocked by the revelations I had uncovered. "Melanie," I said one evening as we sat in my mother's house, surrounded by her books, "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm ready to reveal everything. It feels like betraying her trust." She took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Henry, she trusted you. She left you everything, her work, her story, her legacy. And now, it's your turn to share it with the world. She wanted to be known, even if it was too late. You owe it to her to honor that." I didn't know if I was ready, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't keep her secret any longer. I had to publish her final manuscript, under her real name, Donna Clark. I had to let the world know that M. Hicks was not just a pseudonym, but a woman who had lived a double life, hiding in the shadows for fear of being seen. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I contacted publishers, legal teams, and literary agents. I made the decision to publish The Woman Who Hid as my mother had requested. I included a foreword explaining her secret life, the reasons she had hidden her true identity, and the impact her work had had on me as her son. When the book was finally ready for release, I felt a sense of both fear and relief. The weight of the secret had been lifted, but now the world would know the truth. And there was no going back. But what would happen when the world discovered my mother's secret? Would they understand her fears? Would they see the woman behind the pseudonym? Or would they judge her for living a life of secrecy? The day the book was published felt surreal. I had spent months preparing, editing, and arranging everything just as my mother had wanted. Her final manuscript, The Woman Who Hid, was now out in the world, under her real name, Donna Clark, not M. Hicks. It was a step I had been both terrified and determined to take. But even with all the preparation, there was still that lingering doubt. Would the world understand her? Would they be kind to her legacy, or would they judge her for hiding her true self for so many years? The first few days after the book's release were overwhelming. The book quickly gained attention. Reviews began pouring in, many of them from literary critics who were stunned by the raw honesty of my mother's work. It was hailed as a masterpiece, but also as a deeply personal, vulnerable account of a woman's life lived in fear and secrecy. The reviews praised the writing, but they also recognized the complexity of the woman behind the words. I wasn't sure how I felt about the attention. On one hand, it felt like my mother's voice was finally being heard, her work appreciated in the way it deserved. On the other hand, it felt like a betrayal. She had never wanted any of this. She had spent her life hiding, avoiding the spotlight, and now, here it was, shining on her, exposing her to the world. One evening, after the book had been out for a week, I sat down with Melanie in my mother's house, surrounded by the books that had filled her life. She was reading the book, her eyes occasionally glancing up at me with a mixture of sadness and admiration. "You know," Melanie said softly, putting the book down, "I think your mom would have been proud. She may have been afraid, but her work is powerful. It speaks for itself." I nodded, though I didn't fully agree. "I don't know, Melanie. It's so strange. She never wanted this. She never wanted people to know her like this." "I think she wanted to be known, Henry," Melanie replied, her voice gentle. "But she was afraid of the consequences. She was afraid of being judged. But this book, her final manuscript, it's her truth. And it's yours now. You're sharing her truth with the world." Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the guilt I felt. I had uncovered something so personal, so deeply buried within my mother's soul, and I had exposed it to everyone. It wasn't just her books that had been a secret, it was her entire life, the fears she had lived with, the love she had hidden. Everything she had kept locked away was now open for the world to see. And then came the interviews. At first, I didn't know if I could handle it. But I knew I had to. My mother's legacy wasn't just about the books she had written, it was about the story of a woman who had lived in fear, who had kept her true self hidden, and who had fought to protect her family while trying to protect herself from the world's judgment. The first interview was a whirlwind. I was nervous, my hands shaking as I sat in front of the cameras. The journalist, a woman in her 30s, asked the questions I had been dreading. "How did you feel when you found out your mother had been living a double life? How did you reconcile the woman you knew with the woman who wrote under a pseudonym?" The question hit me like a punch in the gut. I paused for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't know," I began, my voice shaky. "I didn't know she was a writer. I didn't know about her books, about her secret life. It was a shock, honestly. But when I read her work, when I saw the depth of what she had created, I understood. My mother was more than just the woman I knew. She was someone else, too. Someone who was afraid, but also incredibly strong." The interviewer nodded, as if she understood. "But she lived in fear. She lived in fear of being exposed. Do you think the world will understand that?" "I hope so," I said, my voice a little steadier now. "I think people will understand. My mom was afraid, but she was also human. She was a mother, a writer, a woman who was just trying to live her life. She didn't want to be in the spotlight. But she still created something beautiful. And that's what matters. The interview continued, but my mind was somewhere else. It was with my mother, the woman who had hidden so much from me. I wondered if she would have been proud of me for telling her story. Would she have been angry, or would she have understood? Would she have forgiven me for revealing her secret life to the world? Over the next few weeks, the media attention grew. The Woman Who Hid became a bestseller. The literary world was buzzing about it. People were discussing my mother's work, her hidden identity, and the life she had lived. Some people were sympathetic, admiring her for the bravery it took to write such powerful stories while keeping herself hidden. Others were critical, questioning why she had kept it all a secret for so long. I heard from strangers, from people who had read her books and felt deeply moved by them. Some wrote to me, telling me how much my mother's stories had impacted their lives. Others asked questions, wanting to know more about her life, about her fear, and about the woman who had been behind M. Hicks. But there were also people who criticized her, who couldn't understand why she had lived in the shadows for so long. They saw her as a coward, someone who had been too afraid to claim her own success. And those criticisms hurt. I knew my mother had been afraid. I knew she had struggled with the idea of being exposed. But I didn't think she deserved to be judged so harshly. As the weeks passed, I began to feel a sense of peace. My mother's secret life had been revealed, but I wasn't sure if it had all been worth it. The book was out there, her legacy was in the world, and I had shared her story. But I also knew that this was only the beginning. I had learned so much about my mother, about the woman she had been, and the woman she had kept hidden from me. I had uncovered a part of her that I had never known, and I had shared it with the world. And in doing so, I had honored her memory, even if she could never see it herself. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. It wasn't from a publisher or a fan, it was from the literary estate of a well-known author who had worked with my mother years ago. They were asking if I would consider publishing more of her work, if there were any unpublished manuscripts or drafts she had left behind. I opened the letter, reading through the words slowly, and realized with a start, my mother had left behind more than just The Woman Who Hid. There were more stories, more books, more pieces of her soul waiting to be shared with the world. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. But what would I do now? Could I continue to share her work? Would the world want to see more of her secrets, or had I shared enough? Would this journey ever really end? I sat back in my chair, holding that letter in my hands, and realized that my journey to understand my mother was far from over. There was so much more to uncover, so many more stories left behind in the pages she had written. And now, it was my job to share them with the world, just as she had wanted. As I looked at the portfolio filled with her works, I felt a sense of purpose that I had never experienced before. My mother had lived a quiet life, hidden in the shadows, afraid to show the world her brilliance. But now, her story, her words, her legacy were out in the open, ready to be shared with everyone. I knew that her journey had not been easy, that the fear of being seen had held her back for so long. But by publishing her final manuscript, I had taken the first step in letting the world see her for who she truly was. And in doing so, I had honored her, her courage, her love, and her fear. And though I may never fully understand the reasons she chose to keep so much of herself hidden from me, I realize that we all have our secrets, our fears, and our own battles we fight in silence. My mother's story was one of strength and vulnerability, of a woman who struggled with her identity and her place in the world, but who found a way to leave a lasting impact through her words. So, I made a decision. I would continue to honor her legacy by sharing the rest of her work, by letting the world see the woman she had hidden behind the pages of her books. And maybe, just maybe, in the process, I would come to understand her a little bit more. As I closed the portfolio, I knew that my mother's journey, and mine, was far from over. But for now, I was at peace with the fact that her secret life had been revealed. And that was enough. If you've ever wondered what it's like to discover a side of someone you love that you never knew existed, or if you've ever uncovered a secret that changes everything you thought you knew about a person, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. And if this story touched you, if you're curious about what's next, and if you want to hear more tales about hidden lives, unexpected legacies, and the complexities of the people we love, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.